Okay, hi everyone. So really great to talk to you guys about this topic today. Normally I'm speaking one-on-one or with very few people inside corporates in innovation departments about this. So it's good to see what you guys are going to think. So of course, corporate entrepreneurship, it's a huge topic. I'm just going to try and touch on a few things that I think can add value to this conference and help us when we start thinking about how can startups collaborate with corporates as well. So as the introduction said, I'm really involved with two companies at the moment. So I'm a director at the Founder Institute. It's the world's largest early stage startup launchpad. So we really take people that have an idea, and often they're actually coming from corporates. That's the funny thing about this. They have day jobs and they're trying to develop their ideas on the side, and we take them through a 12-week accelerator process to help them then launch their ideas. They actually have to found companies, and we're at a rate now of 1,000 companies a year being produced, and this is happening across 100 cities around the world. I'm also focusing on the Academy for Corporate Entrepreneurship because what I found working with early stage startups in the Founder Institute was that a lot of these people are employees. The average age is 34 years old, and these people are very frustrated. They're not getting to exercise their ideas inside their own organizations. They're not getting support from their employers. So often what ends up happening is they end up leaving. And I can totally relate to this because about 10 years ago, I was a bit of an entrepreneur within Intel. I actually made a deal with my boss where I would be allowed to spend 80% of my time trying to do entrepreneurial activities and working on something that would really add value to the organization, and 20% of my time would be dealing with my team responsibilities and what this particular business unit had to do. So I worked for 1 year, built up about 100 different stakeholders on this very pertinent problem that Intel was trying to solve. I got to fly to Silicon Valley from Munich. I was an intern at the time. I got to present to a board of managers that were reporting directly to the CEO, and flew around in the private Intel jets that they have that shuttle people throughout the different offices. And senior management turned around at the end of it and actually said, wow, this is great. This would be valued at about $1 billion to Intel if we actually go ahead and implement this. And we would have been ready to implement it. Then what happened was there was a change of CEO. So Craig Barrett left, Paul Otellini came in, and guess what happened to the entire business department where I was working? It got cut away. Everyone lost their jobs. They were under threat from AMD, the main competitor, and therefore none of this actually got implemented, although it was already proven to add a lot of value. So that is my passion behind entrepreneurship, really. As Mike said in his earlier keynote, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to be extremely obsessed almost and passionate about the topic that you're involved in. So just to set the stage, this is all about helping big companies get their innovation mojo back. Intuit, in my opinion, is one of the leaders of applying lean startup inside the organization, right? So when Scott Cook, the founder, turned around and said, we need to start innovation catalyst programs because we are losing our innovation mojo. We are losing that, what made us successful in the beginning. So we have to remember that all corporates were once a startup, right? There's no corporate on this side and startup on this side. It's actually the same continuum. It's just that startup is in a different phase, and many will not make it to actually becoming a corporate. So we're on a mission to create the world's greatest corporate entrepreneurs. And this quote at the bottom really, sits at my heart because 75% of the S&P will be replaced by 2025. And this level of disruption, the speed of disruption is getting faster and faster. So we'll talk a lot about unicorns, I think, at this conference. And this is why the corporates are showing so much interest now, because the speed of innovation is happening faster and faster. So before I can move forward, I need to go backwards. And I just want to point out a few things that's happened, epic failures maybe, to do with corporate entrepreneurship. So I have a picture and a bit of a clue. Does anyone know who that is? Yeah, who is it? Wozniak and Jobs, right? So they were entrepreneurs working at HP. They wanted to get HP interested in smaller computers. HP said no, we're not interested. They went to Atari. Atari also said no. So that's what actually caused them to found Apple, just out of frustration. Can anyone guess what example I'm trying to get at here? Our leadership just don't see the potential of Silicon Gate technology, SGT. Who missed out on that opportunity? Anyone? Not IBM, no. There's actually Fairchild Semiconductor. So Robert Noyce, etc., left Fairchild and they founded Intel. This is how Intel got founded, because Fairchild was slow to react to SGT. And that was the original technology that the first processor was built on. It became detrimental to Fairchild in the following years because actually thousands of employees then left Fairchild and went to Intel to support those operations. I guess everyone here is enjoying the outdoors and does a lot of skiing. So this is an interesting guy, Joe Tanner. He was told by his boss at DuPont, you can't test new ideas if you don't have an advanced degree. They only let people that had advanced degrees test and experiment with new ideas. So he actually left and he joined a company called Gore. Gore, funnily enough, was actually a spin-off from DuPont, but it established a very different culture, a culture of trial and error, learning from failure, and he was allowed to practice his ideas there, which actually led to the introduction of Gore-Tex, right? What's this one about? No? It's Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera. A researcher came up with the idea, presented it to management, and he was told, that's cute, but don't tell anyone about it, because it doesn't fit into our current strategy, which is all about print. And then we all know what happened, right? And this one I find really interesting, because it's almost like beginning with lean startup. So this guy knew that he couldn't suggest, he was an underappreciated market researcher working at the Bank of California, actually. The picture is referring to MasterCard. It's a credit card, right? So for 9 months, this person worked in secret, collecting data from potential customers and going to other banks and collecting supporters without telling his boss or his CEO. 9 months later, he had 200 customers that were signed up and ready to work with the partner network of banks to use the credit card. And that's how MasterCard got set up. It was a product from the Bank of California and other banks. The CEO at that point couldn't say no. Had he gone to the CEO with the idea originally, there's no way he would have been allowed to have worked on that idea, because it wasn't in line with the CEO's vision of the company at that time. And one more example is, again, a researcher at 3M, Phil Ortquist. He was actually working on developing a coating that would be 100 times brighter than white paint. And when someone saw him doing this, they actually said, hey, why are you working on that idea? That's not your job. We're not paying you to do this. So what did he do? He didn't stop working on it. He worked for months and months, from 7 in the evening until 11 at night, 4 days a week. And a few months later, he had a coating that was 100 times brighter than white paint, and that is why we have these types of road signs today. So what are the learnings from this? According to Gifford Pinchot, who coined the term entrepreneurship, you have to be a rebel, right? The old way of doing things was always going undercover, not telling anyone, working in secret, just so you would be allowed to develop new ideas that could have a profound impact on the company. So either these rebels, they had a choice, right? They either persisted and did it in secret, and then it actually worked out in the end. Maybe they weren't given the rewards that they should have been. Or they ended up leaving the company and potentially becoming the competition, as was the case with Intel. And that led to the ultimate disruption of the original company. And it's also, another learning is that it's not that there are no good ideas or good people within these corporate companies, but there seems to be no good systems or culture to foster this type of innovation. And that is something that we are really trying to address. So we thought, this is a question we need to answer. How do you foster innovative ideas? So we turned to the startup world, because that is where it is happening the most. And I wanted to take some lessons from here. So there's all these amazing, great players in the startup world that are helping entrepreneurs to get up on their feet and do great things. So the work of Steve Blank and customer development, right? The Founder Institute working with people that just have an idea, and we're giving them a real sanity check and introducing them to curriculum and mentoring so that they can evolve those ideas over time. You have incubators popping up. You've got the mentoring at Y Combinator if you are already mature enough to get into such a program. So many things are happening on many different levels. My partner, Brant Cooper, actually wrote the book, The Lean Entrepreneur, which is the follow-on book from Eric Ries's Lean Startup, where also the Intuit case study is mentioned as one of the first corporate case studies where Eric Ries was invited into an organization to see how can we apply Lean Startup inside existing corporates and not just startups. Work done by Startup Bootcamp and Startup Weekend, right? So there's all these places where we can go and learn. And what we saw was that really it boils down to 5 things, I think, in my opinion, just to keep it simple. So innovative ideas need a structured process. For an entrepreneur to go through those phases of building a business, different things need to happen at different times. So it is kind of stage-gated, even though it's an iterative process within those stage gates. It's very much about mindset. So we need to look at when do we need a search mindset versus an execute mindset. I'll come on to that in a second. Skills. So we believe that entrepreneurs are not born, they are actually made. Right? Not everyone is Richard Branson or Steve Jobs that comes out of the womb as an entrepreneur. You're not a visionary from day one. You become a visionary by learning from failure and changing your direction. It just looks like you were a visionary in hindsight. So we can definitely teach the skills of entrepreneurship. And mentoring is also very important to learn from people that have been there, done that. So every mentor at the Founder Institute, for example, is someone who has scaled a technology company. That's the bar, that's the level, so that they can teach you how to avoid the mistakes that they've made. And also the environment is very important, and that is something that changes throughout these different stages. So we can look at it like this, and at every stage, there's a different goal. Right? So ideation is very much about coming up with creative ideas, having that creative confidence so you can think bigger. And I think in Europe we have the problem that many startups are only thinking for their own market and not thinking, like in the talk we had earlier, how to go global from day one. You then need to find problem-solution fit. Right? Am I solving an important problem for a customer who's going to pay for it? Am I able to offer the solution in the way that they want to adopt it? You then incubate, so that's about finding product market fit, and then you're moving on to launching and scaling, right? Launching is really gaining sales traction and growth, and then you optimize. And something that we often forget is the mindset here, and this is the typical difference between corporate and startup. Corporates are optimized for executing. That's their daily business. That's what 99% of people inside corporates do and have been trained to do very well. And that's great. So the challenge for them now is how do we adapt to these search methodologies? How do I push ideas through those 3 phases so that we can get them into the launch phase? And similar to Jeffrey Moore's solution adoption S-curve, there's a gap in the middle. And there's a huge gap between this discovery and incubation, which gives rise to the valley of death. And I think most of you probably heard this notion of valley of death is actually where good ideas go to die, essentially. Unfortunately, they just don't get off the ground because of many reasons. It could be funding, it could be lack of support, but mostly it's to do that they haven't actually found their customer. So we could map some of the startup ecosystem into these phases even. If I was focusing on getting great ideas, I would look at the work done by IDEO, creative agency, and how to build creative confidence within my employees. This is where Startup Weekend is a great format. You know, Startup Weekend doesn't really create long-lasting companies, but it's a great tool for entrepreneurs to get into the right mindset, build confidence, make connections, and start experimenting. When it comes to discovery, this is something that needs to happen over a slightly longer time frame. It's not 2 days, it's more like at least 12 weeks, where you're going out and testing different parts of your business model. So it's actually not about creating the product and seeing if the market likes it. It's much more to do with, can I identify a customer segment, right? Is this really a real problem that we're addressing? And if it is, would we be able to build a business model around it? So testing the commercialization and sales aspect before we move on to building the product. And places like Techstars and Y Combinator are very good at supplying the mentoring and product development resources that you need to get you through incubation and also the funding. So when we talk about discovery principles, we're really looking at 3 things. It's gaining a deep understanding of the customer. It's designing purpose-built experiments to test certain hypotheses. And it's making decisions based on data. You know the concept of the HIPPO, highest person paid opinion? That's what happens inside corporates. It's people's gut feelings that make decisions rather than basing it on data that from experiments that have been run with customers. So an organization's ability to learn and translate insight into action rapidly is actually the ultimate competitive advantage. This is where we're looking to bring more of that lean startup into the enterprise. So discovery then really means validation. How do we validate our ideas before we go ahead and build them? And what we've been doing at the Academy for Corporate Entrepreneurship and our partners is to break this stage itself into 2 other phases. So really, we start off with a 3-day lean innovation kickoff program, help you to define ideas, come up with actual experiments, and collect data on day 2, and then learning how to pivot or iterate depending on the results and the insights that you've gained. So this is a great way to engage employees and test real-life ideas in the real marketplace before anything has really been pursued. And the great thing is that we then get to observe how our team's working in this way and who likes to work with these kinds of methodologies. So we're actually able to identify potential entrepreneurs within the organization. But those that do not go on to phase 2 are able to still apply these methods back in their day job. Some other people might continue and go into more of an accelerated process that's supported by curriculum and mentoring week in, week out over 3 months. And here you really want to be focusing on customer-facing experiments that help you design and build your product, and also go-to-market strategies and how are you actually going to get sales. And these things will then get you ready to go into the incubation phase. Okay? So mentors actually make you accountable for fast progress, and you would move a lot faster than you normally would. So I'm going to just show you a video of a few minutes of how this is actually working inside a corporate company. It's a global media company that are under threat from changes in their market. So they decided to push a bunch of employees through this process. So there's a bit of a video here.
We did a big organizational change about a year ago and created startups within Bom Negócio. Ever since, we've been trying to expose them much more to lean startup principles and to the concept of validating ideas with users and not with their bosses.
Bom Negócio is a very innovative company, and what we're trying to help them to do is to have a good process that they can follow.
We're going to try to teach them to learn about their customers in a different way, and also to understand them deeply.
And that might mean focusing on customer problems, challenges that they're experiencing, and then being bold to come up with new solutions or ideas to solve those challenges that the customer is facing, and then follow a systematic process for taking those ideas that would be valuable to a customer and actually testing them from a business perspective.
So over the next 2 days, teams actually come into the session with an idea that they want to work on, a way that they want to make Bom Negócio better. We help them to transform that idea into a series of experiments that they'll go run with real customers.
Get them to have an experimental mindset.
Hopefully it leads to either a winning idea or enough evidence that we should stop this idea.
This is not something I'm used to, especially the part of interaction with strange people, but I think this is much important because they are our users.
Now we're gonna go to the streets to interview people about the new tests we're going to do.
When you go out and you talk to people, you end up finding out interesting things and also make new discoveries that you haven't imagined. So you end up challenging yourself. I think it's pretty interesting and fun.
They'll run about 3 experiments over the course of the 2 days, and at the end of it, they'll present what they learned throughout the process.
It's very intense. You have to do a lot of things, and all the time is very short.
30 minutes ago, we decided to change our customer, our problem, our solution. That's what we will start to work now.
What I actually liked most about the winning team was they started off with a completely different idea. And then when they ran the initial tests for that idea, they found that it was actually simply not going to work.
And in the end, we didn't know what would be our second experiment. And we came up with a really good idea that was to do a real MVP.
They were actually able to test their full model where they pretended to be a buyer, they found a real seller, and they actually pretended to come and pick up the item and deliver the item to the buyer. So they completed the full cycle.
We can test really fast and get like real opinions in 15 minutes and 1 hour.
They just did such a great job of failing and then coming back and bouncing back in order to create a really great experiment.
The guys really committed to fully doing this for 2 days and trying to embrace the concept as much as they could.
They really developed their ideas and really tested them in the market, went out there to meet users and presented it in a very convincing way. So I was very impressed with that.
This is the first kickoff to something that we're going to start implementing and using more and more in our organization.
That really makes me believe that people will be able to use it in their day-to-day lives because they've really done it now. Very valuable to involve the entire team in this. I recommend also the other sites in Schibsted to look at this process and see whether you can bring your team through it. I'm very excited about it. It's a very good investment, I think, for our company.
Okay. So that gives you a bit of an insight into what's happening, at least for those first 3 days. It's a real introduction to get cross-functional teams of employees, maybe working with other people across other departments that they haven't met, on real problems that that corporate is currently facing in the marketplace. And it's an introduction to design thinking, customer development, and lean startup, all merged together to actually get results within those 3 days. They actually went through 5 sets of experiments, and based on that, they're really able to make good decisions as to which new ventures should they pursue and which ones should they not. So really, a lot of people think that lean startup is about speeding things up, right? But it's not. It's slowing things down. It's putting in more sanity checks and making sure that people don't jump from idea into that incubation and product build stage before they've really discovered, is there a potential market and how would they offer a solution to that market? So we believe that today's challenge is really about addressing these 3 things inside corporates. It's building the capabilities to be innovative, to be entrepreneurial. Now, that could, in some stages of the 5 phases, be for everyone. Everyone can contribute to ideas. That can come from any corner. I totally believe that. What I don't believe is that every person can be an entrepreneur over time. So then corporates need to single out those people who are going to be entrepreneurs, because they're not going to, you're going to have to be a certain type of person to work for 1 year on an entrepreneurial project and go through all the ups and downs that Mike was talking about earlier. So capabilities need to be addressed differently at different stages of the innovation life cycle. There needs to be systems in place that make this easier so that we don't end up with the dilemmas that I had with the examples I showed you earlier, right? People are becoming rebels, doing things under the radar, or the other alternative is to leave the company. So for each stage, there should be certain initiatives and systems in place that make it possible to achieve the goal of that stage. And what upsets me or confuses me a little bit sometimes is that corporates just go out and they say, okay, this is our new innovation initiative, but they're not yet really defining which aspect are they addressing. Because a lot of the initiatives that I see are actually only to do with ideation. And we could also have a conversation at where does the collaboration with startups come in? Because I think that also needs to look different at these different stages as we go along. So how to accelerate innovation, and then ultimately you want to transform culture. So you do become a company that is a bit more like Google or Intuit, where employees across the board are applying these types of methodologies. To help with culture, we also have a train the trainer aspect to this. So as teams go through the program, we're looking to skill up internal innovation managers so that they can take responsibility on how to manage and coach startup teams, and then they can train other people to do the same. So it becomes easier and quicker to launch new startup teams. And another thing that is really important is that the millennials are coming. So this is not just about addressing innovation today, but we need to think about keeping existing employees, but how to attract new employees, right? So if 70% of millennials are already saying they would be willing to give up their job and try something else, yet we know how hard it is to do a startup, isn't it a great opportunity for corporates to go and offer those people that are more inclined to quit, but they want to work in an entrepreneurial way, let them do entrepreneurial projects inside the organization. That's why we need the capabilities, systems, and culture to foster doing that. So in summary, will startups save the corporates from disruption? Maybe. I don't really think so. I don't think the startup is the answer. I think there's a much bigger ROI to focus on the practices, the methodologies, the things, the mentoring, the environment, all those things that have made startups become great. If corporates can learn how to adopt those and bring it into their organization, then I think that will have a much bigger ROI on keeping some of these dinosaurs alive for a little while longer yet. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation, and I have a bit more time, so if there are any questions, we could take some.
Thank you, Jan. Any questions? We have a mic, and the beautiful blonde lady and dark lady going around. Okay, a question.
Thank you. This last summer is very good, and what my question would be about the other way around. You have many practices in corporations that can be very well used by startups also, and what about the marketing department in the corporation entering the startups, entrepreneurial startups earlier? For example, many times startups think of products.
Yeah.
Even though it may be not the right thing, but okay. But in corporations, probably in the long term, they think of brands, of how the customer is going to feel about a new product, a new brand. And this entering a startup phase earlier might be even a good thing that could speed up the sustainability of the venture.
For the brand to do startup?
To build the brand from the very start.
The startup building up their own brand, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah? Definitely. I mean, why not? And my partner, Brant Cooper, who wrote Lean Entrepreneur, he's just written a book on how to do lean brand. So how startups can use branding as a key growth factor, I guess. So yeah, I agree. It's also about branding, but before you can brand, you've got to know who your customer is, right? And that's where most are going wrong at this stage.
Maybe we have time for the final question. Yeah, the gentleman here.
Hello. Hi. So many times corporates buy startups to get innovation. So it's like a shortcut to get innovation. Do you think that's a good strategy for corporates, or should they innovate within the company?
Or should they?
Innovate with their own employees.
So I don't think it is a great strategy long term. I think it potentially serves its purpose, right? You're potentially acquiring some IP that you couldn't do yourself, depending how mature the startup is, and potentially acquiring then a team that's going to stay working in the organization. But how many of those actually work out, right? It's a low percentage. So that's why we're saying, don't rely on the startup to solve all of your problems, but learn to work in a more efficient way. And really, all it's about, lean startup, is just minimizing waste, right? So if corporates can figure out how to use this search mentality at the right time and then switch to the execute mentality, that's going to make them a lot more efficient. If they can build up the systems and processes to foster that from happening, they'll also be able to keep the employees that are willing to do that. Potentially, then you could argue they don't need to acquire other companies because they're developing these companies within the corporate itself.
Surprise, after the last question comes also the bonus question. And then we're done.
Supposedly your presentation, your talk has an impact on certain people here. That's the intent. What would be, I mean it has, but what would be the pre-work and the homework for the audience to increase the impact of what you were saying?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the audience so well. I know we have people that are from startup and from corporate, and I guess this is more focused on the corporate people that want to run programs like this internally. So the pre-work or the homework would be to definitely talk to me on a much deeper level if you're interested in doing something like that. Because it is very complicated, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? It's a strategy that needs to be adapted depending on what is the existing environment. But it's definitely doable. Like you saw in the video, those guys went on to launch 3 new ventures then over the following 3 months, not even doing it full-time, doing it part-time, but with the help of curriculum and mentoring, that's what's possible, just like how startup teams go through accelerator and incubator type of programs.
Okay, thanks.